How you going, guys? Today we are installing a Nomad valve body on the AB60 transmission found in the Toyota Landcruiser 200 series. Let's get started. Alright, before we put the vehicle on the hoist, we road tested the vehicle, make sure it's all clear of codes. Now that we're back on the hoist, we'll start taking off the bash plates. We're going to take off this bash plate. It's got 6 bolts. One here, one here, one here, 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 and here. And then it just slides back and out. Part is this bash plate has to come off. We've got 4 bolts, 1, 2, 3, 4. Now that we've got access to the transmission sump, we'll start draining the oil by removing the 14mm sump plug. I also removed the check plug at this point as well, just to make sure it does come out. They can be stubborn sometimes and not come out. We'll try to hang the back of the pan down to drain more oil out of the pan. Now I've just got 1 bolt at the front still in. These are a rubber gasket and they can get stuck a little bit. And then we can start draining the rest of the oil out of the pan. You can get the last bolt, take that out and just lower it down slowly. These pans have got 4 magnets. It's good to remove those, give them a bit of a clean with a solvent or a degreaser. Now we'll remove and discard the gasket. In the valve body kit, we do supply a new gasket. Sometimes the gaskets will come with these little crush tubes. Sometimes they don't. So if the kit doesn't come with the crush tubes, just pull them out, give them a bit of a clean, and they just pop back into the new gasket that we supply in the kit. Next step, we'll take the oil filter off. That's held on with 4 bolts. 1, 2, 3, and 4. Now these are just 10mm bolts. And when you take the filter off, it will empty out oil out of the filter and can splash around. O-ring stayed in the valve body, so we'll pop that out, set the filter aside. The next part is we'll be removing the loom, the internal loom, off all the solenoids. There is 4 solenoids that are a little bit tricky to remove. If you've got a small probe, that generally helps quite a lot. Or maybe even just a little flat blade screwdriver. But I usually just put the screwdriver in there, or probe, and just lever it out slowly. It's got a tiny little tooth there, and that clips onto that edge there. So, like I said, there's 4 of those. There's 1, 2, and the other 2 are over this side. 3 and 4. And the rest have got little clips on the side that you just have to push in. You push in and pull the plug out. Just a little flex like that. And I'll pop the rest out. Now we've got all the wiring off the solenoids. We've got 2 temperature probes, or sensors, that are held in by little retainers and 10mm bolts. And the one on the driver's side has got the longer bolt. Once you've got the bolts out, just pull it out, just held in by an O-ring. I'll grab the other one out. Next part is we'll take the detent spring off. This is what gives you the force on the T-bar as you go through the different gears. There's just one 10mm bolt here. Now on top of the detent spring is another little plate that goes on top of it. Now we're at the stage of removing the bolts that hold the valve body to the transmission. They're all 10mm bolts and they run around the perimeter. There is a few different size length bolts. So the longest ones are in this position and this position. There's a second longest that's right here and here. Then you got the third, or the second, or the third longest. One here, here, here. And then the rest are all the same size. Now I've left loose just the front bolts, just to let the rear of the valve body drop. Now the valve body is actually holding up a set of accumulators. There's 4. So there's one here, one above there, and above there. The rear 2 generally stay in position. It's the front 2 that usually pop out when you drop the valve body. Before I lower it down, there's actually another black and a black cooler drain back valve that will drop out as well. Try to hold it on top of the valve body, and you've also got the shifter rod as well has to be removed. Now that's the black valve I was talking about. That's the shifter rod there, and that one there is the front accumulator. The other one that dropped out is this one, along with this spring that pops in like that. Now this black cooler valve, it just pops into that hole there. I'll show you that when we put the new valve body back in. Now it does have a spring. It's a very light spring. Basically what this piece does is stops oil draining back from the cooler itself. So it holds the oil in the cooler system. We've got 3 grommets Two of them have already actually dropped out and they stayed on the valve body. They're like a thick O-ring. We supply these in the kit as well. All right, ready to put the new gasket on the pan. As I said before, some of these gaskets don't come with the crush tubes. But yeah, I've pulled the crush tubes out, cleaned them, and they just slide back into the gasket just like so. They should just get held in there. And that just sits on the pan just like so. All right, at this point, we're going to swap over the solenoids from the original valve body to the Nomad or Extreme valve body, whichever one you opted for. So first, we'll need an 8mm socket. We'll take out the 8mm bolt here and also the 8mm bolt there. Now these, underneath these little brackets, what holds the solenoids in place are little rods, and you can use a magnet just to grab a hold of the rod, just like so, and they can slide out. So that's one, and that's two. Now before we refit them into the new valve body, we need to swap over the manual valve. This is what's linked up to your T-bar in the vehicle. So we'll slide that into the new valve body. We can fit our solenoids. Now the solenoids have a groove where the rods fit. That's the groove there. If it's rotated any other spot, the rod shouldn't go in the spot, like in its place. So right now it won't go in because it's too far in. Slide it out. So those two are on. Now I'll leave these just nipped up, and then we'll tighten those up with a torque wrench. So we'll remove the other 8mm bolt. On this one we can do one by one. Just like so. Now we swap to the 10mm. Just one solenoid. This bolt here holds in two solenoids. Blue one goes on top because it's got the bent up tag. Next one has got the loom retainer. Now they're all nipped up, I'll grab the torque wrench and we'll tighten up those bolts. All right, the first two bolts we'll tighten up are the 8mm bolts. The setting on those is 60 inch-pounds or 7 Newton-meters. Now the 10mm head bolts are 10 Newton-meters or roughly 90 inch-pounds. All right, now this is ready to go back in the vehicle. In the kit, you will get these 3 new grommets, as well as a new oil filter as well. All right, getting ready to fit the Nomad or Extreme valve body back into the transmission. We need to fit these grommets. The best way to do it is to use a bit of solvent just to get rid of the oil around the little tubes. Now if you've got any Vaseline, petroleum jelly, just put it on the grommet. Next thing we have to do is we have to fit this cooler valve. You can actually use Vaseline to hold it up inside the transmission. I'll just get rid of some of the oil with the solvent. Goes in this rectangular hole here, which is actually right below the lower cooler fitting. The spring goes up. A whole lot of Vaseline. Will help stay up. All right, next step is we're going to refit the accumulators. Bit of a tip to help hold everything while we're fitting the valve body. If you just have a bit of scrap, flat bit of steel with a hole in it, what I tend to do is just put it in one of the sump plug bolt holes, and that will help hold the accumulators in. Now, you don't need this, it's just when they keep falling out, it makes life really difficult. Just like so. So we've got the accumulators in, cooler anti-drain back valve, held in with petroleum jelly or transmission jelly. Do not use grease. The grease won't melt into the oil. Right, next step, we're going to line up the manual valve. That slots into the manual lever. There's a hole in the side of it. Now start with one of the front corners. Just put a bolt in. Go to the opposite corner. Don't tighten those bolts all the way, but at this point we can remove our little steel plate if you used it. Slide that out. And we can tighten that back bolt until the valve body is just touching. And we can grab our bolts that hold the valve body on. I like to just give them a bit of a rinse with solvent. So they're the 4 different lengths. If you want to include the other one that holds in the temp probe, you've got 5. But these ones, there's quite a few of these. These go mostly around the outside. So 1, 2, 3 and 4. We've got one here as well. Makes 5. Next one is just here. Next one. All right, we'll go the next size up. There's 3 that go in the front. These 3 here are actually the same size as the one that holds in the driver's side temperature sensor. And we've got the 2 longest ones left and one slightly shorter than the longest. So the longest one is here and here. Second longest is here, and the back corner one that we've already fitted at the start. Now I'll just go around just to nip the bolts. All right, the valve body to case bolts need to be tightened up to 11 newton meters, or roughly 97 inch-pounds. I'll usually start roughly in the middle. Now I'll just go over the bolts just to make sure that I haven't missed any. All right, the next step is we'll fit the wiring loom. Make sure that you fit the right colours to the right solenoids. So black plug to black solenoid and white to blue. Same on this, you got black plug, black solenoid, green, green. And you just keep going along. All right, the next step is we're going to fit the retaining mounts for the temp sensors. They slide in the side of the temp sensor, just like so. These 2 bolts get torqued up to 10 newton meters or 90 inch-pounds. Next part, refitting the shifter detent spring. Make sure the roller is in the center of the lever. And tighten this one to just 10 newton meters as well, or 90 inch-pounds. All right, next step is we're going to fit the new filter that's supplied in the kit. A little bit of Vaseline, transmission oil, just on the O-ring. And also doing this will actually remind you that the O-ring's on it. A bit of a wiggle. and it should just sit flush, just like that. We'll just get those bolts to touch and then we'll torque them up. These bolts are torqued to 10 Newton meters or 90 inch-pounds. Right, now we're at the point of we'll clean the surfaces down and then we can refit our pan. Now we've cleaned the pan with, in our case we've used our hot wash, but you can clean that with solvent, rinse it out with water and just let it dry. Try not to use rags in here. Rags will cause fibres and it can cause valves to get blocked. And it can also block up the filter as well if you put too much rags. We'll get our bolts. Make sure our gasket is seated correctly. All right, we're going to torque up the pan bolts. The factory spec is 4 Newton meters or around 40 inch-pounds. All right, at this point I like to torque up the sun plug, the drain plug. Now the spec on that is 20 Newton meters or 180 inch-pounds. I'll leave this one out, which is the check plug at the moment, for the filling process. All right, the next part we're going to remove the fill plug. Fill plug is up beside the front drive shaft, or front tail shaft. That's a 24mm size plug. That's what the plug looks like there. Next up, we're going to fill up the transmission before we start it. Now, once we get to about the 3 litre mark, oil will start coming out of the check port. That's when I'll put the check plug in, put another litre into it, and then that's when we can start the vehicle. Once the vehicle's started, then we can continue filling. Right now we've got about 5.5 litres in it. I'm going to pull the fill hose out, chuck the plug back in, we'll lower the vehicle down and start it, and then lift it back up and continue filling the oil. All right, now that we've got the vehicle back down on the ground, we'll just start the vehicle, put it back up in the air and continue filling. Now we're just going to continue filling it until it falls, the oil comes out of the check port. We should be nearly getting to that point now. Now I usually let it just start to dribble. So around now, I'll pull the plug back in, torque up this bolt to 20 Newton meters. or it's around 180 inch-pounds. Also, retighten the fill plug. The torque specs on that one is 40 newton meters. All right, now that we're at the, we've roughly got the oil level that we need, we'll drop it back down, run it through the gears with the shifter, and then probably a road test, and then we'll come back up and recheck the oil level. All right, now that we've got the correct oil level, we'll go through the gears. Just hold it in the gear for a few seconds. We've got neutral and drive. So neutral, reverse, and back to park again. All right, so now that we're back to park, we'll shut the vehicle off, go for a road test. Once we'll bring it back, go back up on the hoist, recheck the oil level, and then once that's all good, we'll put bash plates and everything back on again. We're back from the road test. Right now I've got it set up back on the hoist. We're going to go back up in the air after I start it, recheck the oil level, and then after that, if that's all good, we'll put the bash plates back on, then we're done. Now, since we've road tested it, there was a little bit of oil still dribbling out before. The oil will expand slightly. I'll let it drain out a little bit. When it does that, that's when I usually chuck the plug back in. And back up to 20 newton meters. Just triple check all my bolts are tight. And we'll fit the bash plates. That concludes the install for the Nomad or Extreme valve body for the Toyota Land Cruiser 200 series. Hope you enjoyed it. Thanks for watching.